I built the bridge with my father's hands, not figuratively. Side by side, we sank cedar posts into the creek bed behind our cabin, our laughter echoing through the pine woods. He measured twice. I hammered once. It wasn't just a footbridge. It was a passage to summers spent fishing, autumns filled with leaf fires and old stories, and winters where we watched the creek ice over from the warmth of the cabin. The bridge didn't just cross water. It carried memories. When Dad passed, the cabin became mine. I kept it as he did. No frills, no fuss, just nature, peace, and the bridge that held us together. Every spring, I repaired its joints like a ritual. Every fall, I sanded the handrails. It wasn't just upkeep. It was reverence. Then came the envelope. Cream-coloured, gold-embossed, Foxwater Estates Homeowners Association. Inside, a letter so smugly worded, it practically curled at the edges. Dear property owner, our recent survey identified an unauthorized structure extending into the Foxwater regulated watershed. Please remove the wooden bridge behind your cabin within 30 days to avoid administrative penalties. I read it twice, then flipped it over as if the back might reveal a punchline. It didn't. I knew of Foxwater Estates, a new upscale development that had sprouted on the eastern shore of the lake, with homes so uniform they looked like cloned boxes. But my land was old land. My father had purchased it back when the county line was still dirt road. His deed, now mine, clearly marked our property. 10 acres, including the stretch of woods and the bend of the creek. Still, I decided to call, just to clear things up. A woman with a brittle voice answered, Foxwater HOA, this is Shelley. I explained the situation politely, how the bridge was on private land, how it had existed long before Foxwater was a name scribbled on a zoning map. Well, she said with a clipped tone, your bridge crosses the creek, which feeds into Lake Garnett. Under our charter, that's within our environmental jurisdiction. Your charter doesn't override county deeds. I replied, trying to stay calm. If it affects the shared watershed, it's within our authority, she insisted. You can file an appeal, but the compliance deadline still applies. I hung up. The next day, I drove down to the county assessor's office. The clerk confirmed my deed. Your land stops 10 feet past the creek's far bank. You're in the clear, he said. With renewed confidence, I sent Foxwater HOA a copy of my deed and a formal notice. The bridge would remain. 2 weeks passed in silence. Then came the sound of diesel engines. I arrived at the cabin one Friday evening, groceries in hand, only to find the earth torn and tire tracks etched through the moss. The air smelled like sawdust and fuel. Where the bridge had stood was nothing but scattered planks, upturned soil, and a backhoe idling beside a flatbed truck. A man in a hard hat glanced at me. You the owner? He asked. I am. HOA said it was a non-compliant structure. We were contracted to remove it. Who gave you permission to enter this land? I demanded. He hesitated. They said it was part of their development area. This isn't their land, I snapped, voice rising like the heat in my chest. He shrugged and climbed into the cab. The engine growled to life. I stood frozen as the machine rumbled away. The shattered remains of my father's bridge left like roadkill in its wake. The next morning, an invoice arrived by courier. Demolition services rendered. $6,472, due. Upon receipt, non-payment may result in HOA sanctions. That's when I understood. This wasn't about erosion, compliance, or environmental safety. It was about control. Foxwater Estates didn't want a decades-old cabin sullying their curated lakeside perfection, and they especially didn't want a private footbridge. My bridge, reminding them that someone else had been here first. They thought they could erase me. They thought wrong. Because while they had their rules and resolutions, I had something far more dangerous. I had time, knowledge, and a deep, slow-burning need to make them feel every splinter they left behind. I didn't get mad. I got methodical. Overnight, I transformed my grief into a quiet obsession. Foxwater had knocked down more than a bridge. They'd stirred something ancient in my bones. Something generational. My family had worked this land before it was even mapped, and I wasn't about to be steamrolled by a pack of clipboard tyrants. First, I hired a land use attorney named Marta Kwan, sharp, direct, and famously unshakable. In court, she was the kind of person HOAs had nightmares about. "You have the deed?" she asked. I handed it over. And photos of the bridge going back 25 years. She skimmed the documents, eyes scanning with clinical precision. They stepped onto your land without consent, destroyed private property, then billed you for the privilege. That's the gist. Marta leaned back in her chair. That's not just trespassing. That's civil vandalism, with a cherry of fraud on top. I don't want a settlement, I said. She raised an eyebrow. You want blood? I want them humbled. Marta smiled. Then we start with research. Over the next few weeks, I learned more about Foxwater Estates than their residents probably knew. The development was still under expansion. Phase 2 was a string of lakeside plots set to be sold at premium prices. According to public records, the land for Phase 2 hadn't yet transferred to HOA control. It was still owned by a shell company called Garnet Environmental Holdings, LLC, and here's where it got interesting. Garnet Holdings was in financial trouble, tax liens, unpaid contractor invoices, and a brewing legal dispute over shoreline. Grading violations. They needed a fast sale to keep the wolves at bay. I made a few calls under a different name, set up a meeting in a neutral location, brought along Marta just to make sure I didn't raise eyebrows. By the end of the hour, I had an offer on the table, a bundle deal on 3 unlisted plots along the lake's west bank, technically just outside Foxwater's jurisdiction, but visually and practically within it, cash deal. No questions, no flags. Wired the funds 2 days later. The news didn't ripple through Foxwater right away. The HOA board was too busy micromanaging mailbox heights and patio umbrella colors to notice that the old cabin owner they tried to erase had just bought the most valuable view in their backyard. But one person noticed, Shelley, the brittle-voiced board president with a surgically perfected smile and a spine made of bylaws. She showed up at my cabin in a tan SUV with the HOA logo stenciled on the door. She didn't even get out at first, just stared at the new construction happening behind the tree line. I'd hired a local crew to start clearing brush and laying the foundation for a dock, my dock, 50 feet long, pressure-treated pine, with boat access, a covered gazebo, and solar lighting. It was going to be the crown jewel of the lake. Eventually Shelley approached, heels crunching on the gravel path. "You're building a dock?" she asked, voice tight. "Sure am," I said. "Got all the permits, county approved, land's mine. You can't just build wherever you want. There's a visual harmony clause around the lake. That clause applies to HOA members. I'm not one." She blinked. "But the shoreline, those parcels, used to be yours. Aren't anymore." Shelley stared, the calculations firing behind her eyes like faulty circuitry. "You're disrupting the visual consistency of our lakeside community," she snapped. "Funny, you had no problem disrupting the structural integrity of my bridge." Her nostrils flared. "There's going to be consequences," she warned. "There already were," I said, turning back toward the site. "Now I'm just balancing the scales." She stormed off. That night, I sat on the slope overlooking the water, watching the moon reflect off the quiet lake. The outlines of my new dock stretched like a promise across the shoreline. A different kind of bridge. One they couldn't touch, dictate, or demolish. And the best part, I hadn't even started on what came next. The dock changed everything. By midsummer, its long silhouette stretched proudly over the lake, framed by solar lanterns that flickered like fireflies at dusk. Kids from town started using it to fish. Elderly couples strolled its length, snapping photos and soaking in the view. Even a few paddleboarders started launching from my side instead of the HOA-controlled marina across the water. It became what my father's bridge had always been, a gathering place, and that made Shelley furious. I caught glimpses of her standing across the lake, arms folded, sunglasses hiding eyes that surely burned with rage. But the real damage wasn't to her pride. It was to her property values. Turns out, the HOA's image of exclusivity, pristine lakes, uninterrupted vistas, and a curated population of Stepford homeowners didn't mesh well with a rogue dock drawing crowds just outside their reach. It rattled them, deeply. That's when the war started. It began with leaflets, pamphlets slipped under windshields, and taped to telephone poles. Unregulated dock raises safety and sanitation concerns. Unauthorized construction threatens lake ecosystem. Protect Foxwater. Demand action against shoreline encroachment. They didn't name me directly, but anyone with a pair of eyes and an ounce of context knew exactly who they were targeting. Then came the inspections. County zoning officers showed up 3 times in 1 month. Each time, they found nothing amiss. I had dotted every I, crossed every T. Marta made sure of that. Still, Shelley kept sending complaints about imaginary flooding, hypothetical algae blooms, and even excessive laughter past sunset. She wasn't just angry, I realized. She was unraveling. Her grip on the community began to slip. The HOA board, once unified under her rule, started to fracture. Some members quietly approached me during dock events. One of them, Reggie, a tired-looking dentist with a nervous laugh, whispered, "Honestly, I think it's great what you've done. Brings life back to the lake. Shelley's just clinging to control." That's when I made my move. With Marta's help, I launched a public event, Lake Day at the Dock, open invitation, free food trucks, live folk music, water games for kids. It was technically hosted by a local nonprofit, but everyone knew whose name was on the permit. Over 200 people showed up. Some came by canoe, others by car, parking up the ridge and walking in with picnic baskets. The dock thrummed with laughter and guitar chords, the scent of grilled corn and barbecue drifting across the water. Foxwater residents came too, first in trickles, then waves. Some hung back awkwardly. Others joined in fully, their kids tugging them toward balloon artists and popsicle stands. No gates, no rules, just fun. Shelley showed up last. She stood across the lake, perfectly still, her HOA badge pinned to her, a cardigan like a sheriff's star that no longer commanded respect. She didn't come over, didn't speak, just watched, arms crossed, jaw tight, while her utopia partied without her. That night, as fireworks crowned the sky, I stood at the end of my dock beside Marta, watching the colors ripple on the lake. "You know," she said, "I got an anonymous call today. Oh, someone asking if the county could use eminent domain to seize a private dock for aesthetic disruption." She laughed. "Desperation is the last stop before surrender. I'm not after revenge anymore," I said. No. I'm after permanence. And that's when I showed her the real plan. From a file folder, I pulled a map, the full outline of the shoreline surrounding Foxwater Estates. Multiple parcels, some tiny, some deep with access to the ridge. Most of them weren't part of the HOA. Many were privately owned. All were available for the right price. I'm buying the view, I said. One parcel at a time. Marta grinned. You're going to surround them. Let them stare out their windows every morning and see something they can't control. Like, what? Like freedom. And in that moment, I realized this wasn't just about a bridge, a dock, or even a shoreline. It was about drawing a line between people who build things to share and those who destroy to dominate. The next week, I closed on 2 more parcels. By autumn, the HOA would no longer face a quiet, compliant cabin owner. They'd face a neighbor with deeper pockets, longer patience, and a dock that had become the beating heart of the lake. Fall settled over the lake like a warm quilt, golden leaves skimming the water, air crisp with wood smoke, and from my dock, the view was perfect. Not just because the trees burned amber across the hills, not just because I now owned 5 shoreline, parcels wrapping around Foxwater like a quiet noose. No, what made the view perfect was the silence coming from the HOA. The fire had gone out of them. Shelley hadn't been seen in weeks. Rumours whispered of a heated board meeting turned mutiny, ending with her resignation. Others said she was taking time to travel or focusing on personal matters. But I didn't need confirmation. Her absence was its own victory. Her replacement, an affable engineer named Luis, reached out with a very different tone. I think things got unnecessarily adversarial, he said during our first phone call. We'd like to find a more constructive path forward. I almost laughed, but I didn't. Instead, I told him the truth. There's no forward, I said. Only balance. You had your turn. Now, the lake belongs to everyone. To his credit, Luis didn't argue. Instead, he asked if we'd consider collaborating on a lakeside festival, co-hosted by Foxwater and the nonprofit that helped run my last event. I agreed under one condition: no barriers, no wristbands, no HOA logos bigger than mine. He accepted. It was a small gesture, but symbolically monumental. The HOA that once demolished my family's bridge without warning now stood at folding tables beside my dock, serving hot cider to families from both sides of the lake. But even then, I didn't stop. Throughout winter, I worked with Marta and a land conservation group to establish what we called the Foxwater Freedom Shoreline. It was a land trust dedicated to preserving public access, banning future HOA expansions, and protecting the lakefront from overdevelopment. By spring, we had secured over a third of the shoreline and were in talks for more. What had started as revenge had become a revolution, and yet I hadn't forgotten why it all began. One morning, just after the first thaw, I walked to where my old bridge used to stand. Only a few weathered stones remained, mossy, sunken into the soil. I knelt and brushed away the dirt, fingers tracing the memory of each timber laid by my father's hands. For a while, I just sat, thinking about what they took, then about what I'd built in return. Behind me, I heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. I turned to see Shelley. She looked different, smaller somehow, not just thinner, but reduced. Her crisp blazers and sharp posture were gone, replaced by a windbreaker, hiking boots, and a faded look in her eyes that spoke of someone who'd finally seen the bigger picture and realized she wasn't in the center of it. I wanted to see it for myself, she said quietly. The bridge, she nodded. I told myself it was just an eyesore, that it didn't belong. But it wasn't about the bridge. It was about control. I said nothing. She looked out over the lake, the dock, gleaming in the morning sun, now surrounded by wildflowers and hand-carved benches. I fought so hard to keep things perfect, she whispered. I forgot what perfect even meant. I stood. Perfection isn't symmetry. It's soul. She gave a sad smile. You won. Just so you know, I see it now. I didn't need her apology. But in that moment, I believed it, as she walked. I turned back to the spot where the bridge had been. Then I looked out across the lake, to my dock, to the kids fishing, to the couple sipping coffee, to the land that was no longer theirs or mine, but ours. A new kind of bridge had been built, not of wood or stone, but of action, of resilience, of standing one's ground when the world insists you bow. Foxwater would never be the same again, and neither would I.